Doesn't seem good.
That's going to be enough.
My heart stopped for a minute. Not as bad as my heart stopped. Oh shit. This is gonna be another hour with the board. Holy crap. I didn't think
It's not like you don't know.
Oh.
it's a rainbow.
God, I don't even know where to begin. I'll pull you guys in.
That color matches it.
Right there you go.
Which really makes your eyes pop. So that's it. I'm actually into it.
Yeah, everyone's learned about the splash stuff.
Oh, I think that's good. That's all.
No, she is.
Reset. Alright. Observation 1 is the framework. A is the trajectory. The first argument, post-World War II, the U.S. Promoted democracy in places like Western Europe by encouraging integration. This is how Italy, West Germany, Portugal, and Spain were democratized. Second argument is Cold War competition. Green A is the idea of strategic interest. That's why we assassinated Mossadegh and why we supported Pinochet in Chile. This is the exact idea of democracy promotion based upon a Cold War ethic of what is a responsible strategic interest in democracy. Third argument is 9/11. Bush elevated as a strategic priority the ability to flinch when population didn't support, i.e. that's why you cut off support of people like Hamas because they failed to meet our standards of democracy, which means the rhetorical construction of places like Egypt and Pakistan has led to our support of dictatorships there because they support our strategic interests. The fourth argument is the Obama administration has been able to form policies that form a logic of realism that fails. For example, the U.S. Relationship with Yemen has supported a corrupt government there as well as the fact that we support Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest funder of Al-Qaeda, despite the fact that we consider this a non-national interest. Additionally, Egypt was systematically destroying its own people while we supported Hosni Mubarak for 3 decades. The B argument is the repositioning. The first argument is the global information age has moved us to a more sophisticated understanding of how power works in an information-based world of cyber insecurity. Power diffuses. A greater threat would be a greater threat than change itself would be a greater threat than change itself would be a better threat than change itself would be power diffusion to the ground level people. This means the speed of communication and technology empirically create a wider range of people to have the ability to solve this. The second argument here is the plan creates a critical fracture with this logic of realism. Thus, we already see is the role of the ballot should be to evaluate a better relationship to geopolitics. We solve the software on ethics with case because we have the role. We question the role of agency with international relations. A prior question because we are not able to question exactly what is ethical before we look at those things. If we're not able to see women as people, we're not able to give them rights and understand them as individual actions. And additionally, this constitutes ethical norms in the international relations. We used to settle disputes with duels until we decided that was a bad way of doing things. Point. U.S. federal government should authorize naval ships to establish rogue global systems for mobile communications access points surrounding Libya.
Wait a minute. All right.
Yeah, I'm going to read the solvency first.
Okay.
Hereafter, this will be called GSM. The first argument, solvency. The first argument is global systems. GSM are the most popular standard for mobile telephones. Over 80% of the global market uses. We do solve. The second argument is as of 2008, there have been 3 to 17 times the amount of people as per the previous year which have had successful trials in the area. Third argument is these rogue access points can be situated across the Mediterranean with naval ships and get access to the internet. The fourth argument is this also solves our framework because it ruptures the sovereign interventionism that we cannot change in the face of geopolitical intervention, which allows for the creation of independent liberal society. Advanced towards democracy. The argument, the first argument is that loyalist forces are launching attacks on places like Tripoli right now. Loyalist forces, anti-loyalist forces, loyalist forces to Gaddafi are increasing their pressure campaign against these areas and are causing destabilization. They're doing things like hitting oil refineries in countries where they're doing airstrikes. The second argument is Gaddafi is using things like helicopter gunships and airstrikes on retaliating cities. There's no propensity for NATO to step in, and if they will, they won't enforce across the board, and they can't stop ground troops. The third argument is that Zawiya, an eastern city, was taken by loyalist forces against the anti-loyalist forces, and Gaddafi still maintains things like mustard gas in order to check back if he gets overwhelmed at the very city level. The fifth argument is government intervention mentioned, the internet has caused intermittent blackouts. The last one's happened for almost the past week straight. The sixth argument is that rebels and the government have reached a stalemate right now. They have each control various cities, thus be the solvency. The first argument is rapid mobilization would increase the accountability and lead to true democracy because the people don't have any access to the internet. They have no ability to communicate between one another and no access to mobile phones. Second argument is the short term. This solves for corruption and accountability, and also the representation of the actual Libyan people. This is a key step in because the U.S. has not recognized the anti-Gaddafi government. The third argument is the only means for a sustainable democratic movement because people have to have access to their own government. They weren't able to do this under the Gaddafi years. And
it makes it easier to fight the government.
Yeah, and it makes it easier to fight the government because they can communicate between forces. The impact scenarios. First argument is human rights violations. Dehumanization comes from the fact that you get killed by helicopter gunships from your government. Comes from it's the same logical answer. Systematic elimination is allowing for systematic elimination of populations. The dehumanization that happens from this is beyond calculation. The harm done to individuals outweighs the entirety of nuclear war because it allows for individuals to be totally marginal before they even die. The second argument is political accountability. Solves real little past. It solves poverty. It solves for structural violence. It limits rights because they get access to a system they don't have any access to right now. They're totally marginalized and their violence is impossible to solve. Fourth argument is democracies never go to war. This is empirically proven in international relations. Libya has stopped using nuclear chemical weapons due to pressure from the West, but they could easily escalate this and lead to an escalation of conflict and cause countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran to check back against them and create nuclear weapons and create a giant nuclear war in the Middle East because there's no ability for anybody to have strategic ambiguity. Everybody would know they have nuclear weapons and there'd be an incentive for a first strike. Advantage to a soft power. The argument of the first argument is that Afghanistan and Iraq are totally straining our abilities to have relations with both allies and people that we are trying to impress our will on, basically. Because, for example, Germany is the most unpopular action by the German government to be in Afghanistan with us and NATO. The second argument is most Muslim intellectuals are also questioning our ability to power protect the region because people like Hamza Yusuf are using the aggressive rhetoric of the new Obama administration to challenge the relationship of the United States to these areas. Additionally, we intervene in conflicts like Yemen covertly without declaring our intentions and using drones in order to take people out that we don't agree with. This is empirically proven. And fourth, we also solve ethics with this. Fourth, this also solves for the projection of Western ethics in our current system. We only use means of war in order to determine what our best strategic interests. Thus, be the solvency. The first argument: this destroys our ability to build coalitions in international governments. Governments are not willing to work with us if we only use hard power to solve our needs because there's no incentive for them. The only thing they can get out of it would be an economic benefit in the world where the U.S. economy is down. There's no ability to solve. The second argument calls for a global repositioning of the idea of a logic of realism. This solves for a rupture. We're basically causing Huntington's thesis to come true when we continue to reassert ourselves as the only means of global power. This is the argument of the impact scenarios. The first argument is that the mythos of militarism leads to a race to the bottom. Our increasing military budget allows us to attack an amorphous threat anywhere we determine there to be Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or whatever we determine is the largest threat to our government. This allows intervention in every single instance instead of allowing for organic democratic movements that can solve for places like Libya and also does allow us to see the inherent value in groups like this that may represent the interests of the people. The second area is soft power. Our soft power approach fractures the logic of traditional realism. Instead of having it allows us to depend upon negotiation and compromise. For example, EU can coax Israel to stop using settlements because it actually has soft power over them instead of just only military aid being the only means that we have to control people like either entire dictatorships or people like Israel. The third argument is that this consensus means the way that we interact with sovereign bodies is especially representative of this fact. In the Middle East, we respect sovereignty to a degree that we are not willing to intervene against people that are dictatorships in their area. We solve best for this realm. Fourth argument is military adventurism leads to extinction. If the U.S. can always justify a conflict, there is never an ability to have full security. The idea that a state could ever be secure is totally bullshit, which means we can always increase our intervention in other countries. That's exactly what allows people to nuclearize against us and cause the inevitable extinction of human rights through things like nuclear proliferation and endless war that causes no value to human life because it can only be within the value of human U.S. security.
Alright, the order will be 3 off, then the framework.
Did I have planned? Yeah.
No.
Oh.
You'll get it eventually. Don't worry. Yeah, then
What did you call it?
the framework. Then advantage 2. 3 off the framework, advantage 2, advantage 1. Yeah, that's okay. Right after our third off.
Right after cheat.
Yeah. Alright, third and ready.
First says Israeli point is that Israel is concerned with the Jasmine Revolution, but they're checked by United States diplomacy delays. And according to Simon Tisdale of The Guardian, Jasmine Revolution has significantly undercut U.S.-Israel security and the cooperation between the two because we're not there's no clear stance made by the United States on what we are going to do within the region. Number two is that Prime Minister Netanyahu has called for tougher sanctions on Iran and Libya. He says that they have serious violations of stability and security, has accused them of being state sponsors of terror. The third argument is that Israel's Israeli Defense Minister Barak is attempting to effectively contain the statements, but he's only doing so in a limited capacity to status quo. He's warned that if a significant loss of Israeli hegemony and security within the region occurs, that there will be a necessary lash out. These points with links. At first, the United States federal government support of Islamic movements provokes Israel's response. The perception of the sudden adjustment of U.S. strategic policy in the Middle East effectively caused them to freak out and caused them to lash out because they're not sure that their primary ally is going to back off on them. Number two argument is that empirically reacted on faltering support by the United States. For example of this, when the United States tried to negotiate Golan Heights, they effectively lashed out at Syria and Lebanon, effectively struck them and started an accidental war with them. The third argument is that Foreign Minister Danny Aslay said that there is a fear of Libya being hijacked by radical groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, means that they have to effectively attack the region to secure their assets. The point of the impacts, we say that an Israeli freakout means that they effectively securitize and launch a first strike within the region. The first scenario I said is Egypt. They're concerned by the takeover of the Muslim Brotherhood, specifically statements that were given by a variety of different candidates who are running for presidency within the region. This means that they've also been conducting airstrikes in the region, suggesting that they are ready to ramp up military support. We said this in the short term leads to a war which kills hundreds of millions of people in the short term, and long term risk escalation by other powers, specifically other non-state actors who effectively get involved and cause retaliatory wars. We say that when the United States effectively has to be drawn in because they have security commitments, or because they have to secure oil, and other countries have to maintain stability in the region, they effectively get involved. That causes global war and turns all of their case impacts. Additionally, the second scenario isolated as Iranian first strikes. This has been a sticking point in relations with the Middle East. We think that they effectively fear that Iran is developing and proliferating nuclear missile materials and status quo. They will attack us because they see that as being the largest sponsor of terrorism within the region. They will use bunker busters, which are the same equivalent of nuclear weapons. We said that kicks up dust in the atmosphere and causes all their extinction impacts. China. The point is that China wants the international community to remain neutral on the Jasmine Revolution. The delays that China opposed the no-fly zone. They've made very diplomatic statements at the UN, including the foreign minister saying that there should be no Western intervention. The number two argument is that Chinese domestic actions show the government is worried about the revolutions erupting. The first argument of this is that the police effectively mounted a huge security operation in China in response to protests supporting the Jasmine Revolution that occurred within the state. The number two argument that foreign journalists have been summoned by the police and told not to go into these areas, go into certain areas where the protests are occurring because they fear that there will be a media spotlight within the region. The third argument is that they block access to a video of Kenyan school children singing a song that considered the word Jasmine. This is something huge in town. Explicitly came out against. You know this. The B sub point is the links that the U.S. intervention threatens China. The little A is economic interest. China overtook the United States as the largest trading partner in the Middle East in 2009. Is that they have a vested interest within the region to maintaining hegemony and actually maintaining their strategic security. The second argument is the national sovereignty plan intervenes in what China sees as an internal conflict, as Libya's internal workings. This creates fears of a lash out via Tibet and Taiwan. They think the international community will castigate them for their human rights abuses, means that they get freaked out. Third argument is internal stability. China perceives U.S. support as a direct threat to their state security and their sovereignty, means that they effectively have to launch a first strike, or at least get involved in the region to effectively contain it. The C point of the impacts, we say that this will effectively destroy U.S.-Chinese relations. First is that this turns states. China will effectively counterbalance with the region, which causes escalation far harder and makes all their impacts. They describe a self-fulfilling prophecy. Number two argument is that collapses trade between the parties, which means that there is an overall likelihood of escalation in areas like Taiwan and the South China Seas, where there are key shipping lines. We said that risk total economic collapse because the United States and China are two of the world's largest economic partners in a world in which economic collapse increases the likelihood for overall resource wars between the two parties. They have enough nuclear weapons to effectively blow up the earth thousands of times over, and could also bomb major cities, which would cause the photosynthetic effect. Additionally, the second impact scenario is increased propensity of Chinese crackdown. In order for them to actually start doing this, they start persecuting people like the Uyghurs and the Tibetans, means that there is a total cultural genocide, turns all of their advantage one, but also increases the likelihood that the United States has to get drawn in because they have security commitments with some of these individuals and do not want to see human rights abuses.
Security commitment to who? Uyghurs?
No, Taiwan. The European Union should authorize naval ships to establish rogue global system for mobile communications access points surrounding Libya. The European Union should authorize naval ships to establish rogue global system for mobile communications access points surrounding Libya. Yes. Competition
Additionally, we first say that any permutation would link to any disadvantages. Additionally, it causes a jurisdictional conflict because there's no way of determining whether or not the United States or the EU should be the one who intervenes. Additionally, it causes China to be more freaked out because they actually perceive there's more Western influence, means that they effectively lash out to a greater degree. Solvency, we say the HMS Illustrious is already positioned in the Mediterranean, means they're able to effectively distribute all this technology, and also the United States has yet to deploy any force from the region, means we have a solvency surplus. Number 2 argument is that France has the Mirage stealth fight. Oh yeah, the second argument is that they have plenty of money to. They've already began commitments to stopping Libya's crisis, which is why they've actually put sanctions on Libya and have wanted to take the lead on this issue. International actors are looking to them to actually take the lead on this issue. Means that they are uniquely positioned to this. Third argument is they have material resources to do this. They have access to literally the same type of technology, means that they can solve. Yeah. All right. I don't know what the hell this is. They don't meet any of their framework in order to describe the hegemonic model, and realism means that they themselves link to their framework, but just we say consequences are really good. We say bloody hands are totally inevitable. Policymakers have to make decisions that affect people and inevitably will hurt some people. That's cost-benefit analysis. Number 2 is deontology is a moral combat. This justifies ignoring genocidal outcomes in the name of being held to one truth. Additionally, consequentialism is totally key to realism. It's key to cost-benefit analysis, which is the most objective way of determining standards. We say that realism is good first. It's key to mutually assured destruction. 60 years of stable deterrence has total nuclear annihilation and escalation turns all of their arguments on advance. One, additionally, is transformative. Realist states that sets new norms. It's demonstrated by the non-proliferation regime, which has effectively created order by using peaceful tactics. Additionally, no consequences equal moral television. Ignoring genocides we cause to stop now. Also, utilitarianism, though, is equal framework because it actually evaluates all individual bodies on an equal level as opposed to something subjective like deontology. Soft power is high in the status quo. First, we'd say that Obama's actually getting through his agenda items. He passed healthcare, which suggested a major win for him. Additionally, he's solving for Egypt. He's suggesting that we should cut all military aid. This is a statement that he made to his Joint Chiefs of Staff. Third is that he's actually improving the economy. He's taking a hard stance on the budget, maintaining that he has control within the country. Third argument is that we have high soft power because we solve for DADT, and also Obama made statements about the Domestic Marriage Act, means that we're high on gay rights, which is a key human rights issue. The fourth argument is that we're solving for Guantanamo Bay. When Obama was asked if he wanted to reopen it or not, he explicitly said no to that argument, means that he's not going to fall into Bush era. Additionally, he won the fucking Nobel Peace Prize for effectively getting things passed like START and a variety of other non-proliferation things, means that is good. The next argument is term. We say nobody perceives the soft power gesture as real, means that they are more likely to lash out because they see this as a form of U.S. expansionism, means that they effectively increase the overall amount of likelihood of escalation. Additionally, we say that their rupturing is totally co-opted by the right. Imagine what happens when people like the Israeli Defense Force read Toulouse-Guattari and then use that justification to effectively blow holes through Israeli-Palestinian settlements. Luda Shrew, look it up on the blog spot that Mike Meredith has. It's called Dick and Ass. It's fucking awesome. The next argument is that violence in these areas is totally inevitable. You're not solving for cultural conflicts that exist in places like Israel and Palestine because you don't rupture things fully. Additionally, we say that realism is totally inevitable. You don't undo the mentality that exists within subjective actors. You also don't undo it within 60 years or within the entire historical context. Means you can't solve for the root cause epistemology, and you don't solve for larger structural issues like capitalism. Means that all of your inequality arguments are totally inevitable. And they also say democratic police theory. All right, on their dehuman arguments, we say death outweighs dehumanization. It's the only impact you can't recover from. Totally irreversible. Additionally, we say that you have no right to actually speak for other individuals. Who are you to say who does not have value? Who does not have that value to life? Additionally, we say that these sorts of things are impossible to quantify. That is a counterpoint.
Okay. The order is going to be the framework, advantage 1, advantage 2, and then Israel angry, Jumwa angry, Jumwa.
Middle Kingdom is better. It was Israel, China counterpoint.
Yeah, you did say freshman. That is both. I'm not kidding.
What's the case order again, Matt?
It's Henry's order. Framework, advantage 1, advantage 2.
Oh, good.
Everybody ready?
Friedenbach forgot to tell Nigel in the 1AC that we weren't reading the argument we read last May. We're going for realism. This is how Oregon goes right. You're going to get beat on it. They say realism is good. You are conceding all of our arguments, which indicate a collapse of realism is inevitable in the status quo world where we fundamentally reconstruct the way the United States engages in realism. We control the internal link to maintaining the entirety of their realism. Good arguments only in a world where the United States can maintain power projection, allegiance, building long term. Do we have the ability to solve all of their arguments about the United States soft power or based within the short term? Our advantages on long-term solvency. We are saying consequentialism is bad, predictions are bad, which means we have long-term access. All of your short-term impacts are irrelevant. You are conceding way too any questions on this answer, I want you to extend the arguments that Obama's looking Bush right now. This means that they're never going to be able to get access to their soft power terms on advantage one because it indicates that they're all based and interpreted within the ethics of Bush. They are conceding and arguing about the type of engagement the United States uses. We fundamentally move away from the military, move towards individual empowerment. This solves all of the links there disad because it's not military aid. Indicates there's no risk of any of the disad in the affirmative to solve. Additionally, Nigel never answers the argument the role of the battle is best conception of international relations. Only ability to deconstruct because we're already caught in a trap of realism right now, which means it's try or die for the affirmative. The only mechanism to stop inevitable war with China is to fundamentally change the way the United States interacts in international relations. He says that death outweighs dehumanization while conceding that we would have the ability to get Muammar Gaddafi the fuck out of Libya, which means that we solve the entirety of our affirmative. They don't expect how the counterpoint would ever be able to solve it, which means they risk that we solve back for advantage once it disad counterpoint means you never vote against that. Additionally, solvency surplus from the permutation gains this access this and that the counterpoint alone can't solve, which means you would always vote on advantage one, and dehumanization now absolutely outweighs death. You can see that it's the argument for how we view individuals and how we move into conflicts, which is exactly the argument our frameworks making. We fundamentally change the way that we view individual lives because we solve, and we're not speaking for others, we're speaking for ourselves. I'm impressed by realism every fucking day on soft power. First argument is your arguments on soft power don't interact with our scenario. We're saying that Iraq and Afghanistan kill our ability to build alliances. They don't contextualize them within any of these arguments, which means free blocks can have to do a lot of cleanup in the BMR, but additionally none of our allies care about the ADT relations or with Europe within the status quo. They're tagging along, but that is short. As per Henry's analysis, he tells you that Iraq and Afghanistan indicate they don't want to interact on military engagement because they don't like that type of interaction. That's why Tom tells you not to read the argument about French jets and on the counterpoint text, but additionally they're arguing about Gitmo and solvency for us. George Bush just put in new military tribunals, and Gitmo means he's looking like Bush right now, which means that we have the propensity to solve. You all know what I meant. They're the same person. They say that this is real. Our argument is that that's fundamentally not true. That coalitions are the basis for international relations. As for all of their arguments as to why realism is good on framework, it means we control the internal link. They say the road rupturing is co-opted by the right, but this is inevitable in the world of status quo. We will answer your Palestine is out within a world, but additionally we would take United States realism as the basis for terrorizing the Israel-Palestine conflict. And the status quo means we fundamentally re-engage the way the United States prioritizes conflicts, which means we don't prioritize Israel rolling on people because we don't need their security guarantees in the region. Additionally, they say that we don't solve Israel-Palestine, which means realism is inevitable. I've answered this argument like 50 times. We are not a criticism of capitalism. Our argument is more nuanced than that. You're conceding arguments which indicate that militarism leads to extinction. We solve the internal link to this argument. There's no coming back from that. We solve the entirety of your argument. Go to the Israel strike. Look, in a world where we win our framework, just the reason not to look at any of their disasters, we have a reason why predictions are true and why you as a policymaker should move outside of this framework because it means the links to their arguments are inevitable, means you hold all these disasters to an incredibly high risk and non-unique. Look at their uniqueness arguments indicates that they're freaking out because of instability based on the United States. Our argument is that this is a substantive stance back of the United States rhetoric means that we look more stable. We can see their uniqueness arguments because it's based on instability. It doesn't read a direction right now, which indicates the link. The link is bidirectional and linked to the United States massively increase the amount of stability within the region because they take fundamental stance on Gaddafi and linked to this is a pro-Israel stance. Muammar Gaddafi is one of the most anti-Semitic rulers in northern Africa right now. He can be hella stoked out by plan. Additionally, linked to a decrease in relations always empirically increases Israel's compliance with the United States because it shows that they don't have the ability to have a military conflict without the United States. This is what all the literature says. John Mearsheimer's just been wrong for so long that Kevin Calderwood still believes it. And we would say there's no propensity for striking the world of the status quo. Israel's irrational actor, which means there's no risk and there will be a smaller conflict. We outweigh on risk of extinction. You need to embrace uncertainty in order to be able to solve long-term risk of this impact. Go to China. First argument is relations are low. Now the argument is that China said they wouldn't revalue the yuan 8. Well, now 10 hours ago, things says wouldn't revalue the yuan because which proves economic cooperation is low. The argument is that Congress is coming to China right now to discuss the 11th bill, which indicates that relations are moving within a context of the economy. Third argument is China's already controverting the United States on marketing right now because it wants to get ahead, but we would say this is fundamentally happening on economic terms. China said today that they would follow the United States on the Middle East within the region while in the same time announcing they were going to build the biggest dam ever built in the world in Iran, which indicates their security within the region, something that is based on economics because it's the best mechanism for long-term solvency. This means that the link in turn is super stellar because it means that a decrease in China relations solves our affirmative better because it creates a race within the Middle East to develop Northern Africa, which means we solve the long-term problems within the region. Additionally, all of their arguments about how China's already kicked out the journalists in the world of the status quo are reasons why there's no impact to domestic instability because all of those populations are already mind controlled. Additionally, they don't have specific enough link analysis. Additionally, all of the United States would have already caused your arguments. Our China bashing arguments would equally controvert their national sovereignty issues, which means the status quo will cause a link to your dissent. There's only a risk that our framework has the ability to solve the long term. Additionally, there is no risk. China and the United States economy is economically interconnected in a world where we would go to trade war. They wouldn't have the ability to get access to resources, which means the United States could just roll on China, stop a war within 30 days. They all know this. We'd rain down ICBMs and whack it while we watched 1 billion people die, which is the reason why China would never go to war with the United States. Additionally, we have the ability to solve the long-term impact of the conflict because we changed the way the United States fundamentally links AA and the killer argument. The counter plan is always going to link to both these arguments. European foreign policy since the end of World War II has been an extension of the United States, which means that every action will be interpreted by China. We would say this is empirically proven by the fact that when who came to the United States, the foreign minister of China was in the European Union. We were teaming them on currency devaluation, which indicates that we are connected in a world of status quo. Additionally, on the counterplan permutation, who both solves the entirety of the counterplan, the risk insolvency deficit means you vote affirmative. And additionally, we would say I just sit block to this. International fiat is absolutely illegitimate. Cannot fiat the actors of the resolution or the same actors. The affirmative solves all of your offense. Get access to PICs and investigation ground counterplans. Solve the entirety of your advantage counterplans. Means we have best focus for enforcement and solvency. DA2 agents key to check their offense with their links and limits. There are 150 countries and countless international organizations. If you never be able to predict most important speech, only chance to answer negative offense and justifies object fiat. You can fiat the terminal impact of your home speech. There's no propensity to solve. Additionally, this means there's no limit on negative fiat. The affirmative always loses because there's always a better idea. Additionally, we would say that this violates the decision-making framework, which is voted for fairness and education. It's safe for everybody to vote. You must know the rules of the game before you vote.
Please don't do that. Alright. Order is theory. Oh, wait. Yeah, theory. Counterplan. Yeah, theory, counterplan. Is counterplan Israel, China. Their framework, and they put dehume death debate here. I have it on soft power. I guess I will try to do it on framework, but there's a chance I mess that up. Okay. Theory, counterplan, Israel, China, their framework, and they put the dehume death debate here. I have it on soft power. I'll try to do it in their order, but I might mess that up. Then soft power, then demo. First argument is merciless to the PMR on theory. New MG argument means no backside rebuttal speak because you give us leeway on all of our arguments and we meet your interpretation. Well, no, we don't. Counter-interpretation negative is one alternate acted as grounded in the literature. First solves all of your standards, means solves all your predictability standards, means that it's uniquely key. Also it gets access to solvency propensity debate. Also, no, your predictability standard doesn't make any sense. Any actor in any of the 150 countries that we might isolate would not have any solvency because they don't have the fucking technology to do this. Because we have to use massive international economies. Also, literature standards. It's also this you say is not key or disadvantage ground. That's absolutely not true. We need to test the necessity of the United States taking action on taking action on this. Also, we need to check. Otherwise, you force them to say things like dehumanization is inevitable. Also, it's key in your framework when you say that we should just evaluate deontological issues. Means we need the ability to subsume some of that moral offense or disadvantages matter in this world. Then you say MLOs or you say MG is most important speech. That's not true. The MO has to deal with all of the offense and one-shot kills like theory. Also, the LOC has to give multiple positions to a fourth of the offense. You say object the ludicrous not being the Middle East doing anything else. Argument doesn't have any real war. Then he says Apple always loses, no reason, no impact. This argument, no. People have been reading these kinds of counterpoints all the time. Means it doesn't create half bias. Also, the E4 wins a lot of counterpoints. Fate also no. Articulated voter value, big reasonability means you value totality of standards, but you have to win every single standard plus each plus. We demonstrate in round views uniquely key to check generic theory debates plus possible value ground versus education perseverance. Counterpoint. He doesn't actually make the permutation, means you shouldn't give them to it. However, the permutation definitely links to all the disadvantages because states United States action. We're making US specific links to this on this position. Then he says the counterpoint links to both on the bottom of China. I'll make that argument. I'll answer that argument on the counterpoint proper first. That is not true. The European Union does not see this extension of the United States, especially on the Middle East. We have made specific arguments. The European Union has taken a different stance on this. The French government already recognized the Libyan rebel movement as a legitimate government on Libya. Means they're diverging over the Middle East. Also, European backlash over Iraq and Afghanistan means not see the United States puppet. Even if they did support Iraq, that was a long time ago. They've universally come out against us. Means not see puppet. Also, it's just based on some 60 years of Cold War analysis. However, the Cold War ended like 20 fucking years ago. Means that is not relevant. You say it was also you have conceived the specifics of our solvency. The Europe already has technology. HMS Wall Street's in the region. Means they already have the regional ships to do all of these things. Also, the France has France's unique reasons to support this. Israel. Not going for it, go to but to extend all their arguments that this is not unique and the impact argument that there's no propensity first strike issues rationale actor China. Just that outweighs certain case multiple reasons. First, China back. Yes, I fuck off. It was China backlashes against the United States democracy promotion. He starts rallying about sovereignty. Means he refuses to cooperate. Means kills all their cooperation coalition based arguments. Also, China is uniquely worse because China has massively influenced all over Southeast Asia. Means they kill democracy promotion there. Also kill your ability to check realism because China behaves in more realist framework. Also cause massive war. When China destroys any cooperation, you say relations are alone. The status quo first argument is not true. China's China and the United States and China cooperating on nuclear issues. They're increasing transparency. Also, the United States making concessions on the space treaty. Also, the United States also we the United States making concessions to China in the START treaty, etc. Means we're engaging with the bilateral framework. Also, we made arguments that Obama is high soft power and status quo cause revaluation. Also, your economic argument doesn't make any sense. Your issues about sovereignty, not about economics. Also, I think this is a lie. Also, this they say they were going to revalue one all the fucking time. Doesn't damage relations. They're totally stable. Your argument about economic cooperation and the status quo means that, however, sovereignty is a different issue. Then you say China's discussing Congress still not relevant. They did all sorts of China bashing in the Bush administration. Didn't hurt relations. However, this sovereignty issue makes it look like the United States capable of intervening in a situation in which Tibetan rebels start backlashing. Also, this is also then you say China's pissed off about democracy promotion and status quo. First, that's not true. The United States hasn't taken a stance on this demonstrated by Obama's things. Also, that's the reason why Obama hasn't implemented no fly zone because they know Chinese would be pissed off about this. You see, the economy turns no warrant to this argument. Also, that is not relevant. This is about sovereignty. You're misunderstanding the nature of our link. First, is that in the Cold War, your analysis of what the United States federal government did in places like Hungary was institute to massive propaganda campaigns under the C.D. Jackson. C.D. Jackson's idea. They also had this in China during all the Cuban crisis. They used lots of propaganda. Means that they are setting up radio stations in Libya. It looks like they will do a similar thing in China when the Tibetan rebels gets out. That's uniquely pisses off China. They're cracking down on internet freedoms in the status quo. They're also cracking down on protesters. Nigel makes these like pretty fucking explicit. Means that it definitely pisses off China. Makes it think that the United States and the West are willing to intervene on their sovereignty issues. Doesn't piss off Europe. Doesn't link to Europe because Europe takes a different stance on this issue. Also, Europe doesn't want to counterbalance China's status quo, nor does it want to promote. Nor does it have the same democracy promotion argument. Then he says we're decreasing China.
We're going to develop Northern African relations.
He says
co-op.
He says it's also a race to develop North Africa. That's ludicrous. China's obviously winning that race. They're giving aid without any conditions. The United States isn't doing anything. Also, Africa doesn't have a single base in Africa. Means that you're incapable of solving this. Also, if this argument is true, then you lose all of your coalition, all of your realism arguments, because the United States is obviously doing it for realist reasons. So we can set up terrorists. We can set up base to check terrorists in that region. Then you say journalism is cheated domestic thing. Our link argument answers that. You see no specific link argument. It's obviously not true. Then you say relations now causes backlash. Not true. We're making delineation between sovereignty issues and economic issues. Means China backlash refuse to cooperate with us on anything. Also means that they intervene in the Middle East all over the place, causing the United States to retaliate because we think we need access to oil in Saudi countries. That is your argument how the United States understands the Middle East. Then you say there are no wars because of economic deterrence. That's absolutely ludicrous. The United States and China almost came to war in the 90s over Taiwan. Also almost came to war with the Cuban Missile Crisis several times. Also, this is a different issue. We have massive proxy wars all over the Middle East and other regions.
Also not true in a world in which we owe $12 trillion
Also not true in a world in which we owe $12 trillion to you can start to Nigel all your questions.
No, it's posturing. I know.
He talks a lot of game on the framework about he's saying realism good, but he hasn't really answered the specifics of Nigel's consequentialism arguments, which is bloody hands are inevitable means you are a moral cop-out. You justify ignoring things like extinction and massive democracy violence, how all over the world demonstrated when they say the China impact doesn't really matter because China is suppressing democracy promotion inevitably means that you are a moral cop-out. You lead to all of your arguments why that would be out. Also, we win the consequences of the best ethical framework. He says they solve all of these things that are indicative of the status quo. We've made arguments of realism is inevitable. You conceded that there's 60 years of Cold War history on this issue. Also, that there's a biological impetus for realism because people always behave in their best interest. Also, it's entrenched in international frameworks like the United Nations. Also, your argument why realism is collapsing in the status quo doesn't really have a good warrant. You just say the United States isn't cooperating on issues like Iraq, Afghanistan. We have answered on the soft power debate. Also, about no nuclear proliferation. Then you say also consider the argument that utilitarianism is the most equal framework because of the value of each body separately solves the impact to our solve the link and the impact to our speaking for others and for all others things. You say they say the world of values uniquely to escaping this logic of realism that is not true. If you moral tunnel vision makes it so you can't consider alternative policy options capable of solving anything because you don't look for alternate solutions. You just wonder if something is morally good. So, actually, do you have a bunch of arguments on framework? There's a bunch of arguments on framework about Obama looking like Bush. I guess I'll answer that on soft power. Wait, dehumed that debate first. There we go. He concedes the argument that you can always rehumanize the world which we're all alive. These extinction definitely outweighs for this. He said they're not speaking for others, but he doesn't answer the argument that you can't say that these lives have meaning or not. That is what ultimately causes value out of life. Then you say that the dehuman outweighs death because it means it's like, I don't know, there's no reason for this. It's a silly argument. Yeah, he does. Soft power. He says none of these are speaking for none of these are speaking to their argument about coalition building. That is absolutely ludicrous. We know that Obama's got the Nobel Peace Prize for nuclear proliferation issues. He also cooperated with Russia on the nuclear agenda. Means he's taking a distinct stand away from Bush, who wanted to push for things like nuclear ballistic missile defense. In Europe, who also backed out of a bunch of these treaties. Means you're taking key issue on international realist issues. Also, in nuclear weapons are uniquely perceived for coalition building because it is the one thing that the United States looks like empirically exceptional on. Also, our allies do care about things like don't ask, don't tell. There's the international consensus in Europe and all these regions that we need to stop being abusive to these individuals. Also extend whatever.
Okay. There will be an overview. Then framework debate, soft power, China, counter plan theory. Wait, what? Overview, framework, soft power, China, counter plan. Everyone ready? No articulated solvency deficit to the counterplan means that there's even a minor risk of dissent. You will be voting opposition. They fuck up the counterplan so bad they're gonna have to go for theory like a Joe Allen move. That is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those concede all of our consequentialism arguments means that we are able to access the entirety of our impact calc. The very bottom of this set, we think our dissent turns your case on a multitude of different levels, and the analysis is far better warranted. Means that we'll be able to control this debate. Go to the framework debate. They have conceded all arguments that bloody hands are inevitable. Means that deontology cannot occur, and that consequentialism is totally has to happen in a world in which policymakers have to make decisions that affect lives. You've also conceded arguments that deontology is a moral cop-out justifies ignoring genocides in the name of not acting because it violates our subjectivity or what the hell that means. I don't really know what FOMO jargon actually means. I just pretend to know that. You've also conceded argument that utilitarianism is the most equal framework means that we have an independent net benefit to consequentialism means that you should evaluate our framework. You've conceded now the way the demonstration of this is when they try to cop out of the dissent. They try and say that our disadvantaged impacts don't matter because they win the framework. They don't win these arguments means that you evaluate the dissent on the same level as the case. They've also conceded all arguments that, about moral tunnel vision related to this. Soft power, we think we're running really good defense here, specifically that we are creating coalitions of status quo, specifically in the instance of the soft power peace prize means that there's a high degree of soft power and status quo already making coalitions, no reason to effectively endanger that, only a risk of the turn. They've also conceded arguments that DNDT is a key issue because it's related to the military. It's also seen perceptually. Everybody in the world knew that Obama was making steps to make gays enter the military. They've also conceded arguments that nobody perceives as genuine. If our analysis on the China dissent is true, then we collapse our ability to effectively negotiate with them. That breaks down realism because we engage in hostile trade bloc wars and also escalation that occurred in the style of World War II. You've conceded this analysis is functionally just a dissent turns case argument. You've also conceded that it's co-opted by the right. Our analysis is not about Israel. It's about the way that policymakers effectively use this tactic. They use postmodern literature and the justifications that you describe to effectively override these moral implications. China. We saw 100% of the democracy evangelical claim later. China is disadvantaged. You concede our impact at the very bottom effectively turns the entirety of your case. You concede that once an escalation occurs, realism is totally impossible because we are engaging in trade wars with China. We're also engaging with them militarily for scarce resources like oil and water. This is all conceded analysis, which effectively gets added to extinction. We say extinction outweighs death for several reasons. It's the only impact you can't recover from. Additionally, it's the only way we can effectively rehumanize ourselves. Once we're dead, there is no way we come back. You conceded all the analysis that proxy wars happen if there is no U.S.-Chinese cooperation. You've also conceded arguments about Chinese crackdown internally means that all your dehum arguments become far worse because China starts killing its Uyghurs and also the Tibetans because they view them as being an unnecessary blight to their population. Means that all of your politics of disposability becomes far worse. Call that bolder. They've also conceded our analysis on the uniqueness is far more predictive about what is occurring between U.S.-Chinese relations. All their arguments are incredibly generic and not warranted particularly well. We say that that China's worried about what the Middle East is doing right now, but they still have dominance with the region. Any ability for us to shift the power from that region effectively freaks them out. That is the story we've been going hard there. We'll go hard for these arguments that they want to get ahead of us economically and we're already cooperating with them on Iran, but that's absolutely not true. China has unquestioned dominance within the region. Conceded analysis on the link level means that we're able to outweigh. Only risk of offense is the increase because they solve North Africa, but there's only risk that creates more competition, means that there's a greater degree that war breaks out accidentally because they're competing over natural resources and competing over regional hegemony means that your turn is just on the link into the disadvantage. You can see that we solve the root cause for cases. As long as we provide the technology, we still allow for democracy. You don't read any U.S. keywords within the PMC means that we're able to solve. Advantage 1 has great solves. You also don't leverage any permutations. We think those permutations would link to the disadvantage if they were made, and you also don't make any arguments about the fact that they already are there now. Means they have a solvency surplus because they have bases in the status quo. Preferred counterclaim. Theory arguments, we think they have to win literally every single argument. You should be merciless to them because the generic counterclaim theory is effectively ruining party debate. It's destroying the ability for us to want to be negative or re-counterclaim. That's why Tom and I always go for the status quo, and Tom Shalley gets pissed off and writes about it on ballots. You will evaluate all these standards that is the most predictable. It's within the literature, and they still got the access to leverage solvency deficits, which they do not do in today's debate round.
It'll be Israel, overview, framework, counterplan, China. I wanted.
Cleaning something up. So I heard
Yeah.
All right, so Israel,
Israel, overview, framework, EU, China.
One more time to make sure.
Israel, overview, framework, counterplan, China. I have one answer. First comes the cheap top and not where you thought it came from. You don't extend the impact defense argument to your second impact scenario, which talks about not airstrikes, but the escalation of the Middle East in Israel as escalates in the area. We have three link turn arguments to this. The Gaddafi is unstable, he's an anti-Semite, and U.S. reliance makes it so that Israel has to go to war. That we solve for the terminal impact arguments, and we also have uniqueness. We say they're going to freak out right now, and only a decrease in U.S. relations be able to solve this. According to Biden's impact analysis, leads to a terminal nuclear war in the Middle East that outweighs the entirety of their arguments. Happens faster than China, and is obviously more unique than China. They don't have a single defensive argument on this. That's where you go right now.
Point of order. The delineation between first strike scenarios does not happen in the MG. All Matt says is no preemptive first strike means that because they're a rational actor and means there's no escalation.
Extends one impact.
Yeah, I mean, I contextualize it in terms
But
of
the
Israel.
internal link is still the same.
Can we please? I contextualize it in terms of Israel strikes, which you could have monopolized and gone for your second impact.
Besides, you just said it's so bad.
It's a
Its
sloppy
impact
kick.
is Israel freak out.
We will consider the question.
Yeah, that's where we go for it. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, we can go for that. Right. There is no way that you can solve for U.S. soft power. They're also conceding that U.S. soft power solves a coalition building, solves a 100% risk of extinction. Military adventurism allows us to intervene anywhere we want to, and allows us to continue to cause things like nuclear proliferation, lead the impacts of all of case. You always evaluate this extinction argument for their short-term impacts because the probability of 100% extinction is inevitable. You evaluate inevitability before time frame because we're all going to die in the long term anyway, and the risk of living in the interim doesn't mean anything. And additionally, if we accept a single defensive argument, you always value it. You always evaluate that argument first. All right, so you got them?
No.
Four.
Thank you. Framework. Realism is real. The shit is broken, though. The second argument I want on here is that your idea about how all these arguments indict ours is a backwards idea. Our third, what is it? The fifth argument about repositioning, where we talk about we are changing into a information age. This means we need to reconceptualize realism. The idea that realism is only what we think is our state interest is not good enough. The idea we need to change our state interest. We solve for that with our affirmative. The diffusion of power is much better than of short-term change. We give the empirical examples of we think our interests are in Saudi Arabia, but they're not in Al-Qaeda, which means you have no ability to solve for, or in fact, we can see the entirety of your defensive arguments are non-terminal defense anyway, because even if you win, it's biologically inevitable and it's entrenched in international frameworks, we have a risk of solvency because the affirmative acts a different way, but additionally, your argument's all based on a different type of engagement. We change away from that type of engagement and say realism isn't that, that's not what's in our best interest. We don't challenge that realism is inevitable. That also means you're not answering the second level of this argument. The role of the ballot is to evaluate the best relationship to geopolitics. It doesn't matter if realism is inevitable. You have to realize with your ballot that this is a bad way to approach geopolitics. You can vote on the impact that our arguments that make your arguments inevitable. Counterpoint. Counterpoint can't solve any of advantage 2. There's no chance of that. The EU is not the US and thus can't increase US soft power. But they're also not answering the argument that this links to the EU links to China specifically. Matt gives the empirical example of how we were double teaming them in the United States when who came here to visit, which means they get no solvency for US. They get no solvency for China. It's perceived as an extension. He just says that the EU is not an extension of the Middle East and Libya. There's no internal link to China here, and this is always more true after the Cold War because we're looking specifically at how we relate to China relations. The US and EU were seen as buddy-buddy against China, which means there's no chance for you to win this argument. There's at least not a risk that this is offense for you. China. Okay. First of all, there's a risk we're winning a huge amount of uniqueness. That means several uniqueness arguments they don't even interact with that. We are cooperating on economic reevaluation right now, such as the yuan, or excuse me, we're not economically cooperating with them right now. But that also reads the uniqueness weighing argument that the constant evaluation of the economy is the most important thing to Chinese relations. Also, there's the third argument here is the real slayer, though. They can see that there will be a democratic battle for the Middle East. It solves for the entire development of the Middle East. They already said they were going to follow the U.S. policy towards the Middle East, which means they wouldn't ever backlash. And additionally, they're doing things like building a dam in Iran, which shows they're not going to check back against this. Additionally, they're conceding terminal defense on this. First of all, they say that
No, they don't have link uniqueness. The United States already came out against Libya, which means
and they don't have link uniqueness. The U.S. already came out against Libya, which means our links are the only ones that are able to solve this back. Additionally, they're conceding that economic intervention will solve.
I don't have the argument that the U.S. already came out in favor of Libya means that there's no link to the
I totally make that argument. I make the link turn and then I say there are alternate causalities that would cause a link to the disad. The United States hegemony, the fact that we're already supporting Gaddafi, the status quo link. I mean,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I answered the disad.
Doesn't matter, two defensive arguments and the impact will save us. Anyway, there's no argument about economic interconnectivities except for we almost went to war a bunch of times. That seems like a good reason we wouldn't go to war now. Maybe your disad was a little bit more unique in the 1990s, but we still didn't go to war even when we bombed the shit out of their embassy in Belgrade. They have no argument here, and they also don't answer this argument. If we're $12 trillion in debt, the U.S. is not going to want to collapse its economy. That would collapse China's economy. China knows that. They're not stupid, and there's 1.5 billion of that. There's a bunch of them anyway, so they would probably figure that out. Additionally, they don't answer the ICBMs who shut down a war in 30 days. This terminal defense against their nuclear extinction scenario. There's no specific impact extended, and the terminal impact case don't always soft power. I'm not even going to go to advantage 1. Advantage 2. They lead a huge generic soft power high block that does nothing to talk about international coalitions. I don't care at all of their arguments about START and Bush coalition building have to do with military issues. These have to do with our fact that we are intervening on an interpersonal, on a secret level, which means we don't have any ability to build global coalitions. It destroys our ability to interact with people like Europe and people across the globe. International coalition is the best way to solve for U.S. soft power. If we don't have soft power, we have to use hard power. That causes military adventurism. That leads to traditional applications of realism that kill everyone on Earth. And there's an inevitable outweighed extinction conflict because we have no ability to ever have pure security. There is no ability for the United States to ever turn off the hard power. They're going to use it to extinct everybody on Earth.